Community. A sense of belonging and togetherness with our fellow humans. The presence of meaningful and fulfilling social relations. In the modern age, few things are in as short supply as these. People are becoming increasingly socially isolated. People report higher and higher rates of loneliness. Fewer and fewer meaningful relations. Houses get bigger, social connections get weaker. Interaction is facilitated more and more frequently by machines. It is sapped of its humanity and reduced down to its most inhuman, dry components. Everything becomes less personal and ever more alienating and isolating. We are constantly divided. Capitalism, misinformation, tribalism, propaganda. All are isolated, all are alienated, all are driven into conflict with all. People feel more alone than ever. We are the victims of the worst kind of individualism. Not an individualism that unites us around our shared differences and shared similarities, but a capitalist individualism that drives us into constant competition rather than mutually beneficial cooperation. Immoral selfishness becomes a virtue, while our true interest remains its rejection. Only some can succeed, and the system seeks to encourage us to succeed to the detriment of the other. We compete for jobs, for livelihoods. We oppress and exploit each other. Competition is everywhere, and cooperation is abandoned unless it can be made subservient to competition. And the individual grows ever more isolated, alienated, and alone. A social species becomes a solitary one. Its nature is rejected, and that which makes it happy becomes a relic of the past. Community has never been closer to death. Isolation, alienation, and loneliness have never been more alive. But what is to be done about this? It is most apparent that a return to community and the belonging and togetherness that comes with it is the solution. But how is this to be done? As is usually the case, spotting issues is far easier than actually solving them. It is of course still valuable in that it represents the first step to finding a solution. How does our society become increasingly community-orientated? I do believe that the death of the church as the traditional centre of community has left a gaping hole in secular society. Of course churches still exist, but many people don't go to them, and you shouldn't have to embrace religion to experience a sense of community. I think that we need to create a secular alternative. Religion can die, but community doesn't need to die with it. We need to set up community institutions and events that facilitate the building of community. Perhaps we even need to make people's living conditions more communal. We need to encourage face-to-face engagement. We need to facilitate meaningful, high-quality social interaction. We need to encourage cooperation rather than competition. We need to encourage unity over division. Of course, I only think that if we are unified behind good things, rather than bad things. These things are far easier said than done. We have to do something, however, because the only other choice is increasing isolation and loneliness, and that is a dark, dark future. That is a miserable future, and not an inevitable one. I think worker democracy is also quite promising here. Worker democracy facilitates greater cooperation between workers and makes the workplace far more of a community than it currently is. Decommodification can also be considered as an answer. This could aid us in moving beyond greed and towards cooperation. That said, large-scale decommodification could be disastrous, and it can be argued that for all of their flaws, markets are superior to their alternatives. A greater amount of direct democracy and community deliberation on a local level could help to build a sense of community by getting people involved and talking. These are just some possible suggestions for solutions that are well worth considering. Finding solutions can be a massive challenge, but we must find solutions. The only other choice is loneliness, isolation, and a miserable existence for a great many. People should be happy, and that means community. This is a challenging issue, but it is one that we must address, and it is one that is well worth addressing. Doing so is an imperative. The breakdown of community is one of the great issues of our time, and we can either contend with it or continue to face its devastating consequences.